It's really not easy, but it is simple. Following Jesus really isn't very complicated in the sense that, we become Christians by simply putting our faith and our trust in Jesus and what He did on the cross and the resurrection. And even a child can do that. Perhaps you have done that as a child. And yet it's not easy. It's hard. But we have to continue to remind ourselves, just trust and obey. Trust in who He says He is, and that He'll do what He says He will do, and then just do what He told you to do. Just obey. We are continuing on in our series, The Real You. And it's really been a series about personal character. And I've talked about different character traits along the way that really builds who we are. And it's really built off of this idea that the real you is the only you that matters. That's why it's always important to talk about personal character. We can talk about our accomplishments. We can talk about, our talents, our gifts, all of these different things. We can talk about, all the things externally that's going on in our world. But it's so important for us to take a look at our personal character. And perhaps this whole situation that we're dealing with, COVID-19, has helped us take a different look at our lives. Not just, what we're doing, but it's actually caused us to slow down a little bit to maybe we're looking inside and we're thinking to ourselves, okay, is there a better version of me? That is a real, authentic version of me. Because really, that version, who I am, whether it's in the midst of a pandemic or when everything's going great, the real me is the only me that matters. And I've talked about different aspects of that. And if you want to follow along, if you're watching this is your first time, there's actually other sermons that go along with this, and you can access those at bainchapel.com. But this morning, I want to talk about a word that I'm going to be honest with you, I really need to work on in my own personal life. And it's just this idea of perseverance. Grit almost, but perseverance. I was fortunate to be a part of the ceremony for my grandfather, Kinsey Reed, that passed away around Thanksgiving time last year in 2019. And I was trying to write down for my words for him, just write down different words that really stuck out. And my grandfather was a part of the builder generation or the GI, the greatest generation. My grandfather was born and at a time where it was like, the Great Depression and World War I and World War II. Like, this was just, incredible, difficult times. And don't get me wrong, you may be in the midst of this pandemic, and this is the toughest thing that you've ever dealt with, and it is a serious, absolutely serious pandemic. But think of all the stuff that America has gone through. When I just even think about the world wars, I mean, I can't imagine being alive during that time where America wasn't a superpower. We didn't really know how it was going to go. And then to make matters worse, there wasn't, constant updates as much as it is. I mean, perhaps all you had was a radio and you're trying to listen to what's going on. So just a really crazy time. But this word and perhaps even grit is just something that really defined my grandfather. It was almost like, Granddad, he just didn't take no for an answer when he had his mind set on something. He was just persistent. I think when things didn't work out in his own job, he decided to start his own tire business. He decided to start that. And he just persevered. I mean, during that time was around Vietnam and all of that. But he just persevered, and he was just tenacious. He just had tenacity. And whether we want to acknowledge it or not, perseverance is a quality that Christians should have. Life is not always easy. It just simply isn't. Life is tough. But perseverance is almost about being tough on yourself. I was listening to Zig Ziglar, and I thought this quote was so interesting. He said, life is tough. But if you're willing to be tough on yourself, it gets a lot easier. Now think about that. Life is tough. Life can be tough financially. Life can be tough physically. Life is certainly tough emotionally. I don't know what you've been through, what you've gone through, but life really is tough. But if we're willing to not just run away from those times, but embrace the challenges and allow perseverance to be built in us, allow that tenacity and that grit and that resilience to be built in us, it's actually, life can get easier. It can get easier. But you have to build those muscles. It's muscles that we don't like to exercise because, none of us wants difficulty. We all just want life to coast and just go great and go as expected. But we live in a sinful, broken world, and perseverance is necessary. Now, to do that, we're going to look in the book of James, chapter 1, verses 2 through 8. James, as we know it, who wrote this, we believe that he was the brother, the half-brother of Jesus. Amazing, right? I mean, it's amazing that James has a book in the Bible. I mean, just think about this. What would it take, for those of you that have brothers and sisters, what would it take to believe that your brother or your sibling was the Son of God? I mean, what would it take? Well, it would probably take a resurrection, right? It would probably have to take an incredible miracle for you to believe that your sibling was the Son of God. And that's exactly what happened to James. James came to believe that his brother, Jesus, was not just his sibling, but actually was the risen Lord. And so if James, who spent, I don't know how much time with Jesus growing up, could believe in Jesus, I think that gives us reason to believe in him too. And James, in the first chapter and in these verses, he shares some things about perseverance. He shares with us some things that are and can be very difficult to digest, but I think it can be so helpful for us. So let's begin reading as James opens up his letter that was written to others, and he kind of centers in on this idea of perseverance. He says this: "Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds." I mean, this almost sounds like James doesn't even know what he's talking about. Consider it joy when you face trials. And what are these kind of trials he's talking about? Those unexpected things that happen to us that really put a strain on us. And James is maybe even just saying this thing, and it just hits us as like incredible. Consider it pure joy. Get happy. I mean, change the way you frame the situation in your mind. Don't think of it as a bad thing. Actually think of it as a joyful thing. I mean, James, does James understand what it's like to be on lockdown or what it's like to go through COVID-19? Does James not understand what it's like to be in your current home situation? Does James not understand what it's like to be married to your spouse? Does James not understand what it's like to have your boss? Does James not understand what it's like to have your kids? Is he just out of touch? I mean, is he just, just far out there? Consider it pure joy. How can he tell us that there could be anything good from the unexpected, difficult trials that we face? Maybe every day, maybe weekly, maybe monthly, maybe even yearly. He gives us the answer. He says, because you know that the testing of your faith. Okay? I want to connect these two ideas. James says, consider it pure joy when you go through trials, because there's something that happens when you face a trial. Your faith gets tested. Your trust in God gets tested. None of us would want situations like this to happen. No one wants to face unexpected financial difficulty, emotional, physical difficulty. No one wants to get that phone call from the doctor or, wants to go through a difficult relationship issue. Nobody wants these things, but here's the reality that's so true, and it's true right now with COVID-19. Regardless of the fact that we don't want them to come into our lives, these situations really reveal what our real faith is. It really reveals what we're standing on and what we're trusting in. I mean, think about this financially, right? I think this is so huge. And this is one of the reasons why I encourage you, and I really want you as a pastor to begin turning your finances over to God and begin giving into His kingdom, and specifically giving into the local church. Now you might think, well, that's exactly what I would expect from a preacher. He's just wanting our money. Well, here's what you need to know. Yes, Bain Chapel can use your money, but there's something a whole lot more at stake. See, where your money goes, wherever your treasure is, Jesus says, your heart follows that. And how you spend your money, or how you feel about your money, actually is connected to your faith and your trust. And perhaps we have really seen that right now. If you have been trusting your boss, if you have been trusting your job, your career, for your help and your sustainability and your security, how's that been going for you with COVID-19? Because when COVID-19 happened and it hit us, it was almost like businesses started shutting down. And perhaps you're watching this and you've thought over the last few months, like, how am I going to make it? You know, my job, I just don't know. Well, you know what happens when you get that strain, it really reveals what's inside. And if you've been trusting in something other than God for your finances and for your help and for your security, that's probably been revealed in some way. You know, even for us and even for me, I say I have great faith, or at least believe that I trust God and I have faith. But you know what? During this COVID-19 lockdown, I've experienced myself just moments of just depression, moments of just sadness, of just being down. And it's like, okay, well, do I really believe that God can help through this, or am I just trusting in whatever I see on the news? I mean, these things really do test our faith. And it's important to understand that the testing of our faith, it really is a good thing. You and I really do need to know where we stand with God. We do really need to know where we're at in our faith. Because if we're not in a good place, it does us no good to believe and have delusions that we're so in it and fired up for God, and us actually not be that place. So these trials that come along, they do something good for us. They force us to look in the mirror and really see, how much do you really trust God? How much do you really trust God with your family and your finances and your health? How much do you really trust Him? Because if a pandemic can wipe out all of your faith, what does that say about your faith to begin with? He says, listen, the testing of your faith is a good thing because it allows you to see where you stand, but there's also something that the testing of your faith produces. It's not just insight. The Bible says this, the testing of your faith produces perseverance. The testing of your faith not only reveals where you are, but if you stay in it, if you stay in the game, if you recognize that, okay, all right, this is an opportunity for me to demonstrate, perhaps only to myself, how much I really trust God, to stay in it. The testing of your faith, the exercise of your faith muscle, your trust in God, actually produces this thing called perseverance. Now think about your own physical muscles, right? Your physical muscles, I mean, you could pray to have more strength. You could pray and write letters to God or whatever, just simply asking Him to make you stronger physically. But you and I both know that unless you exercise, unless you lift some weights or try to push something, prayer probably isn't going to help. Now, I believe in miracles. God can do whatever He wants to do. But the reality is, if you and I don't exercise our physical muscles, then we can't expect to have physical strength. The same thing with endurance. I don't know if you've ever run a marathon, a half marathon, 5K or whatever. But one of the big pieces in order to be able to run that is to have endurance, is to have perseverance. And you don't get that kind of endurance just by simply praying. People who run marathons, they don't just simply pray that God is going to get them through the marathon. No, they have to train. They have to work. It's about going a certain amount of miles and then pushing it further and further and further until eventually you get to the point where you can run that long. It's pretty incredible, but it doesn't just happen magically. It happens when you exercise the muscles. And here's a truth about perseverance. Yes, God can give us endurance and perseverance magically or miraculously is probably a better way to say it. Yes, He could just give us that, but oftentimes what God does is He uses the testing of our faith to produce it. He works on us in the midst of our difficult times in order to produce staying power, grit, perseverance, just that tenacity to hang on. And yet, I don't know how your muscles feel about exercising, but you can get sore. It can be tough, right? It can be hard. And developing perseverance is probably not something we all just get excited about. But James says, look, when your faith gets tested, it's an opportunity to exercise your perseverance muscle spiritually, your endurance muscle spiritually. And let me just tell you, that whole idea that that's going on, that should give you joy. Because we all do need perseverance. Not everything in life goes how we plan it. Not everything in life is always great. Sometimes life is really challenging. And we need perseverance. We need tenacity. We need grit in order to make it through and be better for it when we get through what we're going through. Now, James is going to give us some more instruction about perseverance. He says, let perseverance finish its work. Finish its work. Now, like I said, I struggle with perseverance and this whole thing. Perhaps this verse was just simply written for me. I don't know what it's written for you. But he says, let perseverance finish the work. Why would James have to say this? Because when we're in the midst of a difficult circumstance that is requiring us to exercise and do this whole perseverance thing, you know what the tendency is going to be for some of us, maybe not all of us. Perhaps if you're more disciplined than me, you don't struggle with this as much. But there's probably at least a tendency in me that I'm going to want to quit. I'm going to want to just take a time out. The moment things get difficult, the moment things start not going my way, the tendency that I have inside myself to say, okay, let's just start over. Let's just forget this. Let's just do something else. Right? I mean, I get all excited about exercising or doing this whole new thing, and it's like I get all the clothes or get all the shoes or whatever, and it's almost like I get out there and I start doing it and it's great, and the first day, woo, and then the second day, yes, and then it's like, okay, we got to keep up the routine. Well, yeah, it wasn't that big of a deal anyway, I don't know, yeah. And James is speaking right to me. I don't know if he's speaking to you, but he's just saying, listen, don't leave the gym early. What God is doing in your life, what He's trying to work in your life, don't quit on that. Because you can walk away from perseverance prematurely. I mean, this is the same is true with Jonah, right? We're trying to teach Jonah certain things. We're trying to teach him to sleep, rely on himself. We're trying to teach him to put himself to sleep, right? And it's so easy, right? At the moment he says something, to just want to alleviate whatever suffering he's dealing with. But, a good parent just can't do that. You can't just rescue your child every single time they have an issue. Sometimes you just got to allow perseverance to let the work be completed. Because James says, listen, if you are willing to just stick with it, right? I mean, COVID-19 has come, and you've gotten depressed, and it's been tough. And you just want to give up. You just want to, scratch whatever plans you had. Scratch whatever goals you had. It's just COVID-19. Let's just get a free pass. Let's just start over. James is trying to say, no. God is using COVID-19. He didn't, force it as a way to, be mean. But He is using it. And let the work that God is doing in the midst of it, let it finish. Don't walk out early. Don't leave early. Stick with it. Right? Perhaps you've been watching these sermons and online, and you joined church online the first couple weeks. Yeah, this is great. But then the more church is online and the more you get out of the rhythm, the more tendency it is to say, you know what, let's just not watch. I mean, Jordan goes live every Sunday. What's the big deal? Can you persevere with me? Can you hang in there? Can you resolve not to quit? Because there's a benefit if you keep going. He says, let perseverance finish the work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. Not lacking anything. You know what's true about mature and complete people who aren't, missing things in their personal character? They are patient to allow even the most difficult things in their life to pass on through. When they receive bad news or they go through a difficult time, they stay in the game. They don't just quit. They don't just quit on the goals. They don't just quit on what God has called them to do. They make it a resolve. You know what? Life is tough. And now life is tough on me, and I'm going to allow that toughness to sit there. I'm going to even be tough on myself. I'm not just going to quit. I'm not just going to leave the gym early, so to speak. I'm going to stay in the game. I'm going to work it out. That's maturity. That's maturity. See, how would you feel if, the first time, an athlete, like let's just say in a football team, how would you feel if at the first sign of a quarterback that he threw an incomplete pass or he threw an interception or a play had negative yards? What would it look like if the quarterback just said, all right, I'm done. Thank you very much. That would be crazy. That would be so immature. And perhaps you get upset at athletes who get all upset over something that didn't go their way. See, maturity is learning that life is a period of wins, and we get wins, but it's also difficult times, and sometimes we lose. But it's not how many times you get knocked down, it's how many times you choose to stand back up. And sometimes we can't even do that on ourselves. Sometimes we just have to ask God to lift us up, but it's so important. Now, if I've said all of this, if you've been listening to what James had to say, and maybe you get to the point where you're just like, Jordan, you know what, that's nice, but you don't really know what I'm going through. All right, I got something that's even bigger than COVID-19. I got something that's deeply hurtful. I've got a real struggle on my hands here. It ain't just I can't pay a couple bills. I'm really struggling here. It ain't just that I have a difficult job. Jordan, I can't even get a job right now. So this kind of stuff, consider it pure joy because I'm exercising my faith muscle, whatever. That sounds good for you. Maybe that's good for you. Your life doesn't seem as hard as mine. But the reality is that Jordan, this ain't easy. And you know what, James, he's good about this. He understands. And hopefully I understand to a certain extent that it isn't easy. But then James gives us another option if you're really struggling to see the joy or the benefit out of what God is working in your life right now. He says this: if any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. James acknowledges, and this is so true, that even though we're supposed to consider it all joy, sometimes we just don't see it that way. Sometimes we just struggle. We struggle to see the good in anything that God is doing. Let me just tell you, I've gone through things in my life, losing, Kennedy in particular, probably been the hardest thing to see God doing as far as a good thing. It was definitely unexpected. It caught us by surprise. And it's hard for me. It's a struggle for me to even look at that and go, okay, consider that pure joy. Okay, God, you were testing my faith, and you were allowing me to go through that, not because you had anything bad in mind, but that you were, one of the things that you were doing in the midst, you were trying to, but God, it's just tough. And James says, in the moments where you struggle to see anything good coming from what you're dealing with, you need to ask God for Him to give you wisdom. You just do. For graduates, I mentioned that at the beginning of the service. Congratulations for graduating and finishing. You might feel right now like, God, what good could come from all of these things that I've been hoping for to just be taken away or changed in the way that I thought them? You might be struggling. You need wisdom. You need wisdom. You say, well, Jordan, why do I need wisdom? Well, because you might not understand all the good things that are coming from what's happening to you, but God does. God sees your situation in a way that you don't even see. His thoughts, His analysis of the situation is so much higher than anything that our minds can even comprehend. And the good news is, when we ask God for wisdom, we can know that God will generously give to us the wisdom. And you know what? God doesn't look at us, it says, without finding fault. God doesn't look at us and say, well, look at all the stuff that you've messed up in your past. You're not even worthy for me to give you wisdom. No, God says, you know what, just ask me. I'm going to help you. I'm here to help you. Consider it pure joy when you face trials of many kinds. I'm here to help you see how perseverance is a good thing that you're going to need. I'm here to help you know that there's some things that I'm doing to make you mature and complete, that you're not lacking anything. I'm here to give you some wisdom. And regardless of how many times you fouled things up in the past, I'm not going to tell you, that you're not worth anything. I'm going to give you what I'm going to give you. But as we wrap up this morning, it is important to note that James does give us a warning at the end of this. So he's saying, all right, consider it pure joy, and when you can't, you need wisdom. Ask God for wisdom. But here's a warning that he gives us when we ask God for something. And you know what? Perhaps this warning isn't just when we're dealing with a difficult circumstance. This is probably good for us to understand regardless of what we're going through, because it's a good reminder whenever we pray to God. But when you ask, you must believe and not doubt, because the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea, blown and tossed by the wind. Now you might say, well, Jordan, I thought you said before that it's okay to doubt. Well, again, sometimes when we talk about doubt, there's a nuance here. I do not believe that an honest struggle to believe and a desire to believe and put your trust in God is a bad thing. I think we all have times where we doubt in that particular sense, where we want to believe, we want to put our faith in God. It's just we have obstacles and we're trying to overcome that. But our heart is in the right place. We want to put our trust in God. I think that's a reality of being human to a certain extent. And I don't really think that James is condemning that type of doubt. The doubt I think James is dealing with here has to do with the metaphors, right? The doubt that makes a person like a wave of the sea, blown and tossed by the wind. A certain kind of doubt, a certain type of skepticism, of unbelief, of non-commitment, choosing not to commit, that would actually just put us in this place where we're just constantly going back and forth. Because here's what James is trying to tell us. He's trying to say, listen, when you ask God for wisdom, God wants to give you wisdom. He wants to help you understand things. But He doesn't give you that wisdom so that you can just go back and forth and not commit on taking action on what you've heard. Right? I mean, God doesn't reveal His will as a suggestion. God doesn't reveal His will for our lives for us to just be like, okay, well, thank you for that, God. Now, I've got some other thoughts that I'm just going to try to put it all together and hopefully it all works out. That's not how God works. See, when God gives us His will, He reveals His will for our submission, not for our contemplation. Right? Not to just put it into whatever other thoughts we have. No, when God reveals His will, He expects us to act on that. He says the person who doubts, that is just constantly going back and forth, the person who just can't commit to whatever God has revealed, that person should not expect to receive anything from the Lord. For such a person is double-minded and unstable in all they do. I keep going back to this. I was given, when I used to work for a bank, they had 4 values and qualities. Responsive, competent, just talking about how, you were responsive, you were empathetic, you knew your job, but then they put on this one, reliable, right? And they said, listen, you could be good at your job, you could be competent, you could be responsive, you could be quick, you could be empathetic, you can understand how a person feels, but if people can't count on you, it doesn't really matter. The most important thing is for you to be reliable. And James is really kind of echoing the same thing in that he's saying, listen, these people who just go back and forth, who can't commit, they're unstable And who wants to be around an unstable person? What good is it for God to reveal His will and reveal His wisdom if the person who hears it simply will not choose to commit? Won't choose to commit. I mean, what good does it benefit that they just keep going back and forth? That's not the people that we're supposed to be. There are going to be things that we're going to have to just simply obey before we understand. There are certain things that we're just going to have to trust God with now and hope that He will reveal to us later. If you are looking for all of your answers about God to be answered before you make a choice to follow Him, it is never going to happen. Because here's the truth. Even people who have been following Him their entire lives, they probably don't have all the questions answered that they have. Right? But we have to make a decision. We have to make a choice. We can't be unstable. People need to know where we stand. And perseverance, trials, difficulties give us a chance to demonstrate our faithfulness to God and our commitment to Him. So let me just wrap it up with just a few thoughts. Consider it pure joy, brothers and sisters, when you face trials of different kinds, trials that are unexpected, difficulties that you didn't see coming. Consider it pure joy. He said, that's crazy. Well, just know that your faith is being tested. And you didn't expect this to happen, but it's good for you to know. Because everybody needs to know where they're at. If you don't know where you're at, it's tough to get to where you're going. And if God wants you to go to heaven and He wants you to become all that you've needed to be, sometimes we need a reality check. And that's the good thing about the testing of our faith. But there's something else. You're being tested to know where you stand, but God may be trying to work perseverance in you so that you will have what it takes to get to where He wants you to go. You can't finish a marathon without perseverance. You can't finish a marathon without endurance. Guess what? You can't really make it to heaven without persevering through the difficult times. But as God's doing that, don't walk out on Him. Don't quit. As Andy Stanley said, don't leave the gym early. Stick with it. Stick with it. Don't quit. Because if you quit, you're going to miss out on the maturity and the completeness that comes when we let things run their course. Hopefully COVID-19 is going to pass and we're going to look back on this and go, you know what, I learned some things. That's good. But don't drop out now. I don't really think it's over. We still are trying to get back to a new normal. Don't quit on what God is trying to do. If this is hard for you, ask God. Ask God to give you wisdom. But know that even though God will give you wisdom, regardless of your past and how many times you've messed it up in the past, be very careful that when you do get wisdom, He does give it to you, that you do something with what you've heard. Because you're not supposed to be going back and forth into what you want to do or what sounds good to you one day into what God says the next day. Commit to do whatever He shows you. And know that sometimes you're just going to have to obey before you understand. Could be the same way with parenting. Jonah might not understand everything we ask him to do, but right now, he just needs to obey. The understanding, that can come later. I want you to understand the importance of perseverance. That's the real you that God might be working on right now. Let's say a word of prayer and then we'll send you on. Lord, thank you for whoever's watching this. I pray if there's anyone that's not a Christian that's watching this, I pray right now during this prayer that they make a decision to follow you. Maybe they don't have all their questions answered. Maybe they don't understand everything that you've done in their lives. I just pray, Lord, that they would repent of their sin, ask you to forgive them of their sin based on the cross and the resurrection. For the rest of us, Lord, I just pray that we can continue to follow you, to let perseverance have its work, so that we can be mature and complete, not lacking anything. And when we struggle, we ask for wisdom, knowing that you will give it to us for us to put into action. We give you thanks and praise and glory in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of your day.